And I just want to say that, my life experiences are no more important or unique than anyone's. But I just happened to live here at a time that most of you are probably not aware of what Silver Reef was like in the mid-50s to 1970, basically. And I was reading recently a comment by Michelle Phillips. She was a singer with the Mamas and the Papas, and she said, "Success is a bubble, but we realized that what we were enjoying couldn't possibly last forever." And I think with many things in life, we're just here. These things happen just for an instant, and then they're gone forever. And that's kind of the way I look at my years at Silver Reef, because things were so different in those days. And I really wish my little brother Breck and my father were able to be here to kind of fill in the things that I miss. Unfortunately, my little brother died in 2000, and my dad passed away in 1970. So I'm kind of left to share some of the memories. But it's been said that memories return in shards. So little pieces come back and then they're forgotten, and or they're called flashbulb memories, where it's just an instant. And so a lot of what I talk about are going to be those types of memories. So my father, Jack Howell, was a miner, and he worked for Western Gold and Uranium, and so Alec Colbath, who originally back in the 40s, 50s owned the Silver Reef, basically sold it to Western Gold and Uranium, and in 1957 they built the mill, and so at that time I was like 8 years old, and it was always he managed that whole process, and so I was fortunate. It was a special day when I could come to work with him and hang out with him and see what it is. I was like 8 years old, and nobody really lived up here. Now, through the years, people have lived in the Wells Fargo building and in the Rice building, as did we. But Silver Reef there just wasn't much here, and not many people came up here to really see anything. It was in bad shape. The Wells Fargo building was in terrible disrepair, and the Rice building was equally in disrepair. But once in a while, a car would pull up and somebody get out and mill around a little bit and maybe drive by the mill. But that was kind of an uncommon occurrence. There just wasn't much here for them to see, basically, except these couple of basically ruined buildings and the other ruins up here. And so, in fact, it was so rare people came up. I used to play basketball, and we would come back from road trips, and the bus driver, he would drop me off at the freeway and like 1 o'clock in the morning, So I would walk that at like 1 in the morning, just to get home. But it was okay. I mean, I was a teenager. It was okay. But in those days, as you start up Silver Reef Drive, Glenn and Wilma Beal lived right the first house. Now it's all painted white. They lived there, and then there was a family, I think their last name was Shekel. I could be wrong, but they were the next house, and then there was nothing else. There were no other homes up here. In 1964 and 65, we lived, my brother and my father and I, we lived in the Wells Fargo building for 2 years, and then in, 63 and 64. Dates get kind of blurry, and they're not that important, but we lived in the Wells Fargo building for a couple of years, and then we moved into the Rice building. And we were there for 3 years, I think, and then by that time, I'm a teenager growing up, and my dad, we owned some property just near here, and he moved a mobile home in there, and so in 68 and 69, we lived in the mobile home. And there were other people that lived here. I can only remember 2 other families during those years that lived in the Rice building. So it was pretty out of the way, and like Annie said, it was basically the population was 3, my father and myself and my brother. I kind of wanted to, my daughter Jenna has helped me with a PowerPoint that might help my discussion, but of course in those days, it was long before digital cameras, or, I mean, many of you remember, buying the film and 12 or 24 in a roll, and praying that when you took a picture, it was actually going to be a picture. And then it was expensive, and then you would take it to the druggist or wherever, and they had to develop it, and you may get back 24 black pictures, or you may get, 5 out of the 24, whatever, but it was an expensive process anyway, at least it was for me. And so unfortunately, I wish that I'd had a digital camera in those days and taken lots of pictures, but I have a few, but not many. And so anyway, my dad, as I mentioned, was the manager at up here, and this picture of him is one of my favorites. It's you may have seen it. It shows up in some historical books about Utah. Milton Hunter, he wrote a textbook for schools called The Utah Story, and my dad's picture's in there. And then you'll come across it every once in a while in a book or an article or something. But this picture was taken in 1958. It was an article that the Salt Lake Tribune did about Silver Reef, just a one-page article. And so that's my dad. And then if you could just bring up, Jenna, the picture of us, the 3 of us. Yeah, there you go. So this picture was taken in 1969. And my dad would pass away the next year. And this was in the summer, and that fall, I went on it.
More light for note taking.
There we go. Okay.
Cut it as much as you can.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I want to record every word. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, I was a court reporter. That's what I did for my vocation for 40 years. So I took down every word. So in 1969, I left on a mission to South America, and then my dad passed away, and Breck had moved to St. George by the time I came home. So that was the end of our Silver Reef vacancy, or living at Silver Reef. So anyway, I've been asked to specifically talk about 2 movies that were filmed, not the whole film, but parts of these movies were filmed right here. And so when Luann called and she says, well, I need a title for what you're going to talk about, and the first thing that came to my mind was When Hollywood Came to Silver Reef, or an alternate title is How I Totally Plagiarized James D. Arc. Luann had held up the books that he wrote. The first one was When Hollywood Came to Town. This was published in 2010, I think. And then 9 years later, he updated it, changed the title to When Hollywood Came to Utah. And so if you don't have one of these books, they're a great addition to your library. He's done just a wonderful job of talking about the filmmaking throughout Utah. But when you look for the two movies I'm going to talk about, the Appaloosa and Gunpoint, there's just one tiny little line about it. And so you won't find too much about the Silver Reef or these two movies. But I would encourage you, if you get a chance sometime, just download these movies or rent them or whatever. They're really quite unique, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about each one of those. So I hope he forgives me for plagiarizing. I hope he doesn't sue me. I don't think he's got a case because it's not for commercial purposes, and I don't have any money anyway if he wants. So let's talk a little bit about the films. Gunpoint was, back it up just a little bit, please. Was filmed in 1964 in the summer, and then the Appaloosa the following year in the fall. And we were living in the Wells Fargo building in 64 and in the Rice building in 65. And so, we were right here. As a teenager, though, it wasn't that big a deal to me. I was more interested in cars and basketball and girls, and I didn't really appreciate the fact that of these two amazing actors that I was going to have some interaction with, and let's start with Gunpoint in '64. Now, both of these movies were distributed in '66, so it took 2 years for them, for whatever reason, to get Gunpoint ready, and then Appaloosa, it took a year before it was distributed to movie theaters. One thing you're going to notice, though, is that I kind of noticed and never had really picked up on as a child, obviously, is both of these have plenty of stereotypes. It was just the way things were in the 60s, and Gunpoint, the stereotype for a Native American, and the Appaloosa, the stereotypes for Hispanics or Latinos, whatever. And as you watch these movies, you'll kind of really pick on how that they really went to extremes to make white people Native Americans and white people Hispanics. And I'm sure there were a lot of those people that were totally capable that could have maybe been hired for these parts but weren't. But that's just something to kind of look for. So let's start with Gunpoint, starring Audrey Murphy. Now, if you could just go one more slide, there we go. Okay, Gunpoint's the story of a town with a gun in its back. And so that can't be a good thing. So yeah, it's really funny how movie producers, they're called tags. They're just little, comments to get you to maybe come to the movie and spend your money. But some of the other tags for Gunpoint were, the woman was his to hold if he could hold a killer mob at gunpoint. So, and another one was, it's a nerve-wracking look at the West through the sights of a rifle. So anyway, that's what you're going to get. Well, it really doesn't have much to do with the movie, but that's the tag. So Audrey Murphy, most of you know, was the most decorated combat soldier in World War II. And I've read elsewhere ever, he was the most decorated soldier. He made more than 40 films and a TV series. He died in a small aircraft accident in 1971 at the age of 45. He obviously was an amazing man. He was also 5'5" and weighed 110 pounds. And I've done some reading about him and how, looking for kind of the things that made him so brave, or why he's considered such a brave man. And in one situation, they were being attacked. His unit was about to, I'm not a military man, so if I use the wrong terms, forgive me, but they were about to be overrun, and he literally grabbed a machine gun off a dead soldier and got on a tank and killed 50 of the enemy and saved the people he was with, the soldiers he was with. So, but he was obviously well recognized for his bravery in World War II. He also, a couple of the other movies he made were the Red Badge of Courage, and then he did kind of an autobiographical film called To Hell and Back, which was his story in the service. And I've never seen that. I've made it a kind of a personal promise to find that. I'd really love to watch that movie. So this, I'm like 14 years old, Breck's 12, and like I'm a little bit disinterested, but there's a lot of activity going on here. This movie is, I'm sorry, I moved on to Gunpoint. Okay. This movie it'll give you a headache trying to figure out the subplots. It's not just a simple film. You've got a lot of different characters with a lot of different agendas. And it basically, and I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I'll just give you the premise basically. So Audrey Murphy, his name in the movie is Chad Lucas. And he's the sheriff of Lodgepole, Colorado. And there's this really bad guy named Drago, Morgan Woodward. You might remember him from Dallas. He was in that series back in the 80s. But he's really a bad guy, and the guys that were with him. And so they were going throughout Colorado and New Mexico, raising heck and killing people and stealing cattle and gold and horses. So Audie Murphy is trying to be proactive and get him before he came to Lodgepole, because he knew what he'd do if he got to Lodgepole. And so the love interest is Joan Staley. Her name in the movie was Uvalde, but her name she had a secret name, and it was Bonnie. And that's one of the subplots. So she was also, you might remember her from The Ghost of Mr. Chicken with Don Knotts. She was his love interest in that 60s film. And then Denver Pyle, in the movie, his name's Cap Cap Holt. He was a captain, so they called him Cap. But he was a deputy of Audie Murphy, or Chad Lucas, but he had a real issue with him. He thought he should be the sheriff. And so he's kind of secretly hooked up with Drago. And then there's this Warren Stevens. His name is Nate Harlan in the movie. His kind of other famous film was The Forbidden Planet back in the 50s. It was a kind of a classic sci-fi film. But he owns the Texas Lady Saloon in Lodgepole. And so he's hooked up with her, but in reality, Chad and Uvalde have a past. They have a history, okay? 8 years earlier in Texas, they were kind of going to get married, and Chad goes on a cattle drive and doesn't come back for 8 years. But there's a story as to why. And so everybody's got secrets, and everybody has different allegiances in this movie. And it's kind of funny to watch these. So Audie Murphy, he goes out, he's got Drago on a train, got him kind of cornered on a train, and so he's walking down the top of the train, and Cap sneaks up behind him and shoots him, and it kind of President Trump moment, I guess you could say. It almost gets him, but it doesn't quite. He falls off the train, and but now he's got a concussion. Okay, so every once in a while during this movie, the screen goes blurry because you're looking at things through his eyes. So that's kind of at a play here too. So anyway, Warren Stevens, okay, I'm taking much too time on this, but it's kind of interesting. Warren Stevens, he's the owner of the Texas Ladies Saloon, and but he wants to buy up the town. He wants everything, and so everybody kind of ends up there at one point in the movie, and Drago shows up. Okay, so you got the sheriff and the bar owner and Drago and his people, and well, Chad's going to arrest him and everything, and he kidnaps Uvalde, and they take off. Okay, so the rest of the story is basically trying to get her back from Drago, and in the meantime, Warren Stevens, he's kind of gone out on his own because she's hooked up with him. Okay, and so magically, all this is lifted up from Lodgepole, Colorado, and deposited at Silver Reef, Utah. Okay, of when Chad and his posse come looking for Uvalde. In the meantime, Warren Stevens, Nate, he's killed a couple of Apache Indians, and now they're really ticked off. And they're on a ridge, okay, and they got all these dynamics going on. To break it down to basics, it's like follow the money. Everybody's after this money, basically, except Chad, he wants his girl back. So I don't need you to kind of figure out the storyline, but look at the scenery, okay? This is kind of the whole purpose of what I'm saying is they show up at Silver Reef, and this is what you would have seen in that movie. The time of the movie at Silver Reef is about 20 minutes, so if you're interested, look up this movie sometime and watch it from beginning to end. So what I remember about that time was there were a lot of people here. As you can see, a lot of people in this movie, and so they had set up their lunchroom basically in the Wells Fargo building. The Wells Fargo building was, we kind of got bumped out of there, and that's where they'd have their meals, and I think they had some tents and things set up. But I remember that Audrey Murphy was just a really kind man. He was available. He was just fit in with everybody. I really only said hi to him once or twice, but he was always acknowledged me, and it was just a whole different experience than the next film we're going to talk about. But my brother Breck, apparently he was in the Sugarloaf Cafe one evening. That was my dad's favorite restaurant, the old Sugarloaf that's long gone. But Breck had the courage to go around and get autographs from me. So I've got the autograph for Audie Murphy, Denver Pyle, Warren Stevens, and David Macklin. He was that young kid that was shooting the rifle. So I wish he was here to tell that story because that was his thing at the time. So I need to move on because of the time, but do you have any questions that anyone wants to ask real quick about?
How long were you in town?
Oh, goodness. A couple of weeks, I think. I don't think it was that long, but like I say, it was a pretty active time up here at the Reef when that was happening. So, okay. So now we're going to move on to the Appaloosa starring Marlon Brando and John Saxon. I was reading recently that Marlon Brando is considered the greatest actor ever. And I guess it's in the eye of the beholder whether he was or not. They say he was right up there with Laurence Olivier, so I don't know who said that, but I was just reading that recently. This probably wasn't one of his finest works. In fact, it was kind of a flop. The movie was kind of a flop, but The movie was also called Southwest to Sonora. I don't know why movies do that. They have two titles, but it was distributed as that alternate name. So this movie also starred. Marlon Brando obviously was in The Godfather and Apocalypse Now and some other really famous movies. It also starred Anjanette Comer. Trini was her name in the movie. John Saxon, he played Chuy Medina. He was a Hispanic bad guy, and he was really bad too. And Anjanette, Trini, was his woman, and then Frank Silvera is the one that was in the movie Right Here by the Wells Fargo. But he was a sheep herder, so they were the main co-stars. And in this movie, it starts with Marlon Brando. He has an Appaloosa, obviously, and he's coming back from the Civil War. And so it had been 1865 or so. And he's in this south of the border town called Sonora. He rides in on this Appaloosa. Well, Chewie sees this horse and immediately wants that horse. And so Marlon Brando, he gets to town, and instead of going to the bar, he goes to the church. Okay, and so he's in the confessional, and he gives the best line of the movie. Okay, he said in his confession, "I'd done a lot of killing, killed a lot of men, and sinned with a lot of women. But the men I killed needed killing, and the women wanted sinning." So I thought that was classic, you know. So anyway, this movie is pretty simple. He wants his horse back. Okay, you don't have all these subplots. The whole story is Chewie beats him up, takes his horse, and it's all about Marlon Brando getting that horse back because he wants to have a stud farm or something for Appaloosas, and he has to have that horse. So anyway, this was a totally different experience for me. We were living in the Rice building at the time, and my dad came home one day. He said to Breck and I, he said, "How'd you like to make some money?" And well, I had no money, so that was a good idea. He says, "They're going to make a movie here, and they want to hire you to stay up at night, and they're going to be here for 7 weeks." And he said, they want to hire you to stay awake all night long and watch their semi-trucks and their props and everything. And it's like, whoa, you know, $700, you know. And so sure enough, everybody pulls up. They start building a set. As with Gunpoint, they purposely did not show the Wells Fargo or the Rice building because it didn't fit into the story. But they're building a set right on the corner of the Wells Fargo building, the southeast corner. And that's where the Ramos would come in. That's the sheep herder. So we've got this job for $100 a week. Well, after 3 nights, 2 teenage boys, 15 and 13, we thought, well, why don't we just take our sleeping bags out on the lawn and we'll just kind of keep an eye on things. So we basically didn't earn our money, but we took the money, okay, which was a good idea. So one day I'm sitting in front of the Rice building, and I was reading a book, doing some homework, and over the ridge on Silver Reef Drive comes a motorcycle. And this is long before motorcycles are as popular as they would eventually become. And it just wasn't that common to see a motorcycle at Silver Reef. And so this guy comes down Silver Reef Drive, pulls over right in front of the Rice building, and I'm sitting there watching this, and this guy gets off all decked out in black leather, you know, and I'm kind of watching this, you know. And so he starts to take off all of his leathers, you know, and then obviously I could tell it was Marlon Brando. So he gets all of his leathers off. And he said, "Can you tell me where they're making that movie?" And these people are all working at the corner of the Wells Fargo building. And I said, "Yeah, I think it's right there." And he said, "Oh, thank you." And about that time, some guy over at Wells Fargo said, "You stupid SOB, we're over here." He said, "Get over here," you know. So he proceeds to put all of his leathers back on. This takes like 4 or 5 minutes, you know. And then he starts his motorcycle and pulls 75 yards to the Silver Reef building. And I'm thinking, this is really weird, you know. But that was basically my interaction with Marlon Brando. So after 2 weeks, we've got $200. And Breck and I had our eye on a little Honda motorcycle that a gentleman in Leeds by the name of Bill Lackner, they had a really tiny grocery store. And so he wanted $200 for it. And it was like, we're going to get this because, you know, we're stuck at Silver Reef, you know, and have been for years, you know. So we buy that motorcycle. It's just a little 250cc or something. It wasn't much of a motorcycle. But so one day they were here filming, and I decided to take the motorcycle and go down to the store and get a couple of things. And I was coming back up Silver Reef Drive. Of course, it was gravel road. It wasn't named Silver Reef Drive. It was just nothing, basically. And as soon as I got just over the ridge there was a police officer there, and he was stopping traffic. So when they were filming, nobody would interrupt the scene. And he's sitting there smoking a cigarette, and he said, I think just go on through there, not doing anything, you know. So I remember I had a really bright red sweater on, and I'm on this little Honda motorcycle. I come over the ridge, and like all these people are screaming at me, you know. And I couldn't make out every cuss word, but there was a lot of that involved. And I'm like, uh-oh, you know. And so I came on down, and I just kept going. I didn't even stop. I just kept going. And then I snuck back a couple hours later. And that movie, they were using the Silver Reef building and the Rice building for their meals. So we were kind of kicked out of the house at that point. And so anyway, I could have been famous, you know, but somebody cut that out of that movie. I didn't see it. So anyway, I want to just kind of close with this scene from the Appaloosa, where there's actually 2 different sections of the movie where they're at Silver Reef. And at this point, Marlon Brando, he's got his horse back. Ramos has been killed by Chewie, and he's buried. And he's also got Anjanette Comer, Trini, the girlfriend of Chewie. What's really unique about this scene is I'm standing right behind the cameraman when this is going on. As a 15-year-old, processing all this that's going on. So the director was Sidney Fury. He and Marlon Brando did not get along. Sidney, he liked to do a lot of film noir, you know, shadows and angles, and just drove Marlon Brando crazy. He insisted on those techniques, and Brando purposely sulked and mumbled throughout this movie, resulting in a claustrophobic restaurant, a cinematic rarity. Okay, that's from the book Brando by Richard Schickel. So these guys weren't getting along. I think Brando just wanted to get through this movie, and maybe he sensed it wasn't going to be much of a box office. Again, the scenery is what I was really trying to show. That was fantastic scenery, to me at least. So those were my experiences basically at Silver Reef with these 2 movies. In the last few moments, if you don't mind, I think I got 5 or 6 minutes. If you don't have any questions about that movie, if you do, I'd be glad to answer them. But I'd just like to share a little bit about the mining activity that my dad was involved in. That's why we were here at Silver Reef during the 60s. So as you look due west, as you follow that road over, I think it's called White Hill or White Cliff, it was Asarco, was that the name of the shaft up there? There's a shaft, it's all been covered with great, if you went over that hill down to the bottom, to the right is where the tailings of the pioneer miners ended up. And so during the 60s, the mining industry was really in flux because, especially at Silver Reef, it wasn't Kennecott by any means. It was just a small mining operation, and the price of silver and copper fluctuated. The cost of funding, was an issue to kind of keep my dad going, the mill over there going. But so for a time, from back in the early 60s, there was virgin rock that came out of the shafts in piles at various locations. So sometimes my dad would process that ore, and other times he would work the tailings. And so my job, Breck had a brain. He got a job at the Conical Station in St. George. He got a regular paycheck. I stayed here and worked for my dad, and I got paid sometimes and sometimes I didn't, which was okay, I guess. But my dad was the miner, and he knew a lot about mining. I was the owner of a Ames high-grade shovel. Okay, that was my pay grade. Okay. So I spent a couple of summers with a shovel in my hand, shoveling tailings or actual virgin ore. And one more slide, gently. That's the area where the tailings were. It just sand is all it looked like, but it was full of, silver and copper that my dad, with the technology in the 60s, was able to recapture a lot of the stuff that they missed. So that's a good hike someday. If you ever want to go for a hike, walk down through there. It's really neat. It's really pretty too. So, and then one more, Jenna. So this was the mill. This was built in 1957. And you recognize the ore bin up on top. That's the only thing that's left, okay? The ore would go in there and the tailings, and it would go across the conveyor belt at the next level. And then in the third level, it would you would introduce water into this ore mill, or ball mill. It had these huge metal balls in there of different sizes. And it'd just go around and around, and the ore would just be pulverized, okay? You'd introduce water into there, and then it would go on. Now, I'm sorry for this picture because, it looks like it's ruined, and it is, but this picture was taken probably a decade later after they closed the mill. But they wouldn't run the mill during the winter because they didn't want to freeze the pipes. And so there used to be a pond just over the ridge here between the ore bin and where we are. There was a pond there that they would get the water for the mill. Well, my dad's partner forgot to drain the pond, and so it flooded, broke all the pipes, and pretty much destroyed the mill. And then my dad was done with it. It was too much to try to put that back together. And it was at that point that he started subdividing up here at the reef. And that would have been in 1969. So, and that was the old assay office that sat just on the ridge below the ore bin. Again, it's been closed for years, but that's the assay office where they would, the furnace where it would end up in a crucible like this. They have this, and this is one that he did. And then these are his scales that he that came from his office where they would actually, I'm sure some of you know more about assaying than I do, but they would test to see how much silver was in a particular rock, and there would be a little tiny dot of silver that would be at the bottom of this crucible, and then they could tell how rich and how much there was. And unfortunately, he used to have Alka-Seltzer. Do you remember when it came in a glass tube? Remember? He would save those little droplets, and so this thing was probably 3/4 full of these little silver. He just did it for fun, I think. But when he passed away in October of 1970, from the time he passed away till the time Breck got home that night, somebody had broken into our house, the trailer and the office, and stole a lot of things, and including my dad's. He was wounded in World War II, and all of his medals that he was given. Anyway, that's another story. But anyway, that's my grandson a couple of years ago, standing in that front of that ore bin, and that's where I spent 2 summers. Basically, I helped in the mill, doing the whole process. My dad kind of taught me how to do what he needed done. But so you remember this song, Tennessee Ernie Ford, 16 tons? 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter's, don't you call me, because I can't go. I almost sold to the company store. I wonder how many thousands of tons. Actually, somebody put that to the test to see if a man could load 16 tons in a day. That's pretty doable if you're doing rock. Tailings was probably not that easy, but anyway, I was talking to Luann yesterday. I'm sorry, I'm right at my hour, but I was invincible in those days. I was young and I thought I was athletic, and you could see the mill. That was pretty dangerous. This is before OSHA. There were, you just did what you did, and we all worked around these exposed machinery. Anything could have gone wrong. And what I did, my dad never knew I did this, but sometimes when you loaded a couple of ton of ore in there, it just funneled down into a little opening that's still there. You can see it onto a conveyor belt, and that would get plugged up. And so there used to be a piece of rebar hanging off the side of that, and I would hang onto that piece of rebar, and I would get down there with my aim shovel, and I would play with that rock until it started to slide, and then I'd pull myself out with a couple of ton of rock above me, which is total idiocy. I can't believe I did it myself. But my dad would have really, really been upset. But I got 2 more things, then I'll sit down. But another really story is, this would have been back in about 63. My dad, in those days, he would go to Arizona to see his parents. Who knows where he went, but so he would leave my little brother and I here at the reef, and we were in the rice building, and he said, "I'll be back after the weekend. Don't get into trouble." Okay, so what could possibly happen? Okay, well, there was like a 7-ton dump truck that he was using at the time, parked in front of the house. So Susan Savage's dad, her dad, Ross Savage, he had a 51 Chevy that was sitting between here and the rice building, just between the Wells Fargo and the rice building. And it had just been sitting there for years. Tires were flat, weeds had grown up. I eventually bought that car from him and fixed it up, but for $25. But so it's obviously not in running condition, but the key was in the ignition. So this is when I became religious, okay? I said to Breck, "Do you think that key would start that dump truck?" I put it in the ignition, it turned over. So I'm 14, Breck's 12. We're driving all over southern Utah in a 7-ton dump truck. And we had the best weekend ever. You should have seen us pull into A&W. We were pretty cool. And thank goodness we didn't see a policeman and we didn't hurt anybody or ourselves. But that's when I converted. So, and I just want to close on this thought. Marietta Mariger, she wrote the book, it's for sale obviously, The Saga of Three Towns. This is a priceless book if you want to look at some of the stories of Silver Reef, but this was written back in the 50s. And she made this comment that really touched me. She said she was talking to Dick Wyman was his name, and he was the superintendent of Western Gold and Uranium, and he was my dad's very good friend, but also his boss. And so they were having this conversation in like 1962 when everything was shut down because they didn't have the money to run it. And so she said to him, and he's telling her how everything's going to come back and they're going to get everything going again. She said, "We wish we could feel so hopeful. Maybe if we knew more, we would, but to us it only looks like curtains. We rejoice over the money this brief activity has meant to our people and sincerely regret the unhappy outcome. But dear old Wells Fargo and dear old Rice Building, keep your faces to the sunrise and your chins up. Who knows what the future can produce?" And I just think that is totally prophetic, because this is what the future brought to Silver Reef. And my dad had the vision that this would someday be what Silver Reef would be. I was young, whatever, but he died early. He had just started the subdivisions, and at this time, he was selling lots with a water right for $1,850. If you wanted a view, it was going to cost you $2,450. So that's how Silver Reef Estates or whatever started. So I know that there's this alliance or whatever between mining and residential, and I don't want to broach that subject. But as a court reporter, I did that for 40 years and reported capital murder cases all the way to adoptions, everything in between, civil and criminal. And sometimes we would have land disputes or trying to determine the value of property or its best use. And the term that I remember used was the highest and best value of this piece of property. So you'd have appraisers come in, economists, and testify about what they thought this piece of property was. And I really feel that's what's played out here. The highest and best use of the property is obviously for single-family residential. That's my feelings. If you don't agree, I guess I'm sorry, but that's just what I see. And I know my dad would be just really excited if he could see what Silver Reef has become and is becoming. That not just three people could enjoy the beauty of this area, but you have families and hundreds and thousands of people that will be able to wake up in the morning and see this amazing country, the beauty of it, and live here. So.
I wonder, where did the miners live during the time when the mill was going and you were young?
I was talking to Susan Savage the other day, and I think everybody that lived in Leeds in those days worked at one time or another at Silver Reef. So they were local. I suppose some of them came out of St. George or Hurricane, but most of them, I think, came from Leeds and Hurricane.
Well, I had an uncle who came here to work, and we came down to visit him one summer. was wondering if you knew him maybe. Carl Van Lanningham?
Oh, I remember the.
Larry and Billy Glenn.
Yes.
Probably were about your age.
Yes, I remember the family.
Really?
I do. Yeah,
Such a small world.
I ran into them at church some years later by chance. They were, I forget where they were living at the time, but it was, yeah. It was,
That's neat.
yeah, I haven't thought of that name for so long. I hesitated for a second. But, so, well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.